I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, am standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life, and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill, went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, it's there you'll find your hill. It's there you'll find your hill. I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
Hey, what's up? How's it going, brother?
Hey, how's it going, Carlos? That was a good intro video. I like that. I hadn't seen that one before.
It's a beautiful rendition of Joe Hill. He was a worker who was killed by the state in Utah on trumped-up charges of supposedly killing a cop. And he was a poet. So one of the things that he became famous for was the last little poem he did before he got killed. And they made a bunch of songs dedicated to it. There's a Phil Orks one that's really good, but it's like 10 minutes, so it wouldn't work for a good introduction song to the program. But
maybe one day.
One day, right.
If we have like a musical-centered stream, maybe we'll open with the 10-minute song. Midwestern Marx the musical.
Right. So we wanted to start talking today, give some updates on what's going on with Midwestern Marx, some new things that have occurred over the last week. And then we want to turn to discussing what I believe is the reason why in just a couple minutes we have 50 people on, which is the MAGA Communism topic. So I think the first update that we can talk about is the book, updates relating to the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press, the Reading the Classical Text of Marxism book that we published a couple months ago, can now be accessed through ebook form and bought at a significantly cheaper price. This is a book that everyone who I've heard engage with it and read it has found it extremely helpful to learn about Marxism. People who are just getting into it, it'd be great for you. And for those that are seasoned readers in the Marxist tradition, as I've mentioned before, it's very helpful in helping you understand where the scientific information has gone since, the studies of Lenin and Engels on science, and where dialectical materialism falls with relationship to scientific discoveries. So that's available for purchase in ebook form. And then another big update that's more personal to me is that we're going to be releasing an anthology, which we have pinned on our Twitter. Let me see if I pull it up. It's called Marxism and the Dialectical Materialist Worldview.
You want to share your screen, Carlos?
That's where I'm going now.
Oh, got you, my B.
Share screen. Marxism and the Dialectical Materialist Worldview. So it's a 550-page monster where I tried to introduce and as systematized a form as possible the dialectical materialist worldview. I talk about how we look at the question of ontology, what the constitution of the world actually is, how we approach questions of epistemology, so how we come to know the world. We talk about how we should think about these dialectical laws, a little bit about how dialectical materialism relates itself to Hegel and to other forms of idealist dialectics. And then after an introduction of 55 or so pages, I get into a collection which I don't think has ever been done before, which is a collection of texts from the Marxist classics on the topic of dialectical materialism. And some of the people in the anthology you see here: Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, J.D. Bernal, and J.B.S. Haldane, both which were British scientists that were extremely successful in the sciences, and they were both Marxist-Leninists involved in the Communist Party of Britain and wrote a lot on dialectical materialism. And then we have Mosiah Olgin, who was a I believe Russian immigrant, but who spent most of his life in the U.S. in the Communist Party of the U.S. and who wrote quite a bit on organizing for communism, and also who wrote some stuff on dialectical materialism. And then Evald Ilyenkov, who's one of my favorite philosophers from the Soviet tradition of creative Marxism. So I think I've tried to have as concise of a anthology as possible, and it's still around 550 pages, but that should be out sometime towards the end of this month.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. Ilyenkov, isn't he one of those mechanical Soviet Marxists who didn't understand Marxism as well as Adorno and Horkheimer and the real Marxists in France?
No. Yeah, he was writing at the same time as these guys, and what's interesting is that there was a space in the West for those sorts of discourses between Soviet and Western Marxism, and there's a few speeches that have been transcribed and published since about these conferences and the speeches that he has given, and it just disproves a lot of the myths that came out of the West. Like, one of the main ones was that the Soviet Marxists and Soviet orthodoxy ignored the question of alienation in Marx because it would make the Soviet Union look bad. And in 1964 or sometime in the mid-60s, Ilyenkov participates in this conference with a lot of Western Marxists and Western humanist philosophers, and he's talking about the importance of Marxist theory of alienation for understanding capital, for understanding his other work more comprehensively. So yeah, he's one of those that shows that although certain things might have been simplified in the more mainstream manual form of Marxism in the Soviet Union, because the purpose of it was, of course, getting to the masses and educating people that had, basically just recently been made literate. Um, the tradition of creative Marxism was always basically there in the Soviet Union. It was there in the 1920s and in the 30s. The debates that were going on, specifically with Soviet scientists, were just brilliant. And then it gets recaptured after the Second World War in this tradition of Soviet creative Marxism, which emerges from Lomonosov University in the 60s, the early 60s, up until the 70s and 80s. A lot of Cuban professors were actually trained and they studied there. So how I got to know the Ilyenkov guy was from a Cuban professor who taught in Venezuela for a while. I think he's in Mexico now. His name is, if I can remember, I can't remember his name, but he's always on the show from Venezuela, Escuela de Cuadros. And the guy's just an animal. And he spent 10 years there doing his PhD, and he studied with the same guy that was the professor of Evald Ilyenkov. But yeah, it's brilliant stuff. I've read basically everything that has been translated to English, and it's really a shame because I've heard from people who read Russian that the colleagues that he worked with were actually more brilliant, and but their work is not translated to English yet, and
Dang,
it's a shame. I've
that's
tried
always that's always just sucks.
I've had comrades from Russia send me like PDFs because Google has the option to translate the whole PDF, and it's not as good as the translation as someone doing it, but you can still at least read what the person is saying somewhat. But since they're like these half-assed PDF that are scanned on like phones and stuff, Google doesn't do it. But yeah, that's one of the projects that I have in mind. Hopefully, go to Cuba at some point and see if some of those texts can be found in Spanish there, because, like I mentioned, there was so much of a connection between Cuban and Soviet scholarship that I figure that the only language it might be in that I can read is Spanish in Cuba. So
That's cool. Yeah, I have been working on, well, kind of. I just happened to do this the other day because it kind of overlapped with what I was doing for homework, actually, for grad school. But I was reading this healthcare administration textbook, and I noticed they said the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The textbook was giving examples of health policy decisions that are made by private interests. And an example they gave was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which who the book said were donating money to Africa for nutritious food and for agricultural infrastructure. And I had remembered there had just been an article from the Seattle Times basically detailing the summit that was held in Rwanda, where African agricultural experts and health policy experts came together and called on Bill Gates and these other wealthy investors to stop funding this Green Revolution initiative, also known as AGRA. And they've actually stopped calling themselves the Green Revolution since this summit happened, basically continuing to do everything they were doing before, just changing their name. But the chemicals in the fertilizer that Western multinationals have been bringing in has destroyed a lot of the African soil, making it very difficult to grow crops. And then essentially what's been done is farmers have been given credit, meaning loans from Western banks that they have to pay back with interest. And that's what they're supposed to use to buy these farming supplies from Western multinationals. So it makes money for Western banks and these Western companies who sell farming equipment. And if these small African farmers can't make a profit, then obviously they end up trapped in debt, spiraling into this deeper and deeper trap of debt, which is basically the concerns that were raised by African leaders and policy experts at this summit. And in response to the summit, Bill Gates, as I said, rebranded the Green Revolution, changed its name, and then did an interview with the New York Times where he basically said, we're going to keep going. He donated $200 million more to the initiative. And yeah, it is just continuing to do it, albeit with a rebrand. and pretending that he listened to the summit in Rwanda, which was hardly covered in Western media, by the way. So I saw a lot of people who were confused when Putin announced yesterday that he would be offering fertilizer for free to developing countries. People were asking, why is Putin doing this? It's in response to the West and these wealthy investors like Bill Gates pretending to bring, agricultural development to Africa, while really, just doing a debt trapping and investment scheme. And the creepiest part about this, and I basically summarized the whole article, but you can read it for yourself, is Bill Gates is pushing this depopulation ideology along with this. There's this really weird part in his interview with the New York Times where he's talking about China. And he's like, yeah, China's alleviated poverty really well. But, in Africa, the population is still growing. So I don't know if we'll be able to alleviate poverty in Africa like they did in China. It's like, what do you mean? China has a population of 1.4 billion. They're the most populous country in the world. But what Bill Gates means is that he wants to depopulate Africa as much as possible, keep the birth rates as low as possible, so there's less mouths to feed. And yeah, so that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, I think it's
Something's wrong with your audio. One sec.
You can't hear me?
It just sounds weird. Sounds
One-
like there's something like a saw in the background.
Okay, 1 second. I think that's the fan. I'll hop back on.
Okay, how can I entertain y'all? I'll check out the chat. Haas told us to keep it cool with Midwestern Marx. That's good. Disagreements are okay. Doesn't always have to lead to a split.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, you sound a lot better.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that I find it more sinister when you have this ethical, quote unquote, ethical capitalism that I think it's part of this general phenomenon of wokeism that we've been talking about, that just tries to put a ethical veneer over exploitative and oppressive practices and the most destructive system the planet has ever seen. And it's specifically sinister because it paints itself as good, but it continues essentially the same thing as before. And I think that at its core, it's a realization that that people are catching up to the system being disruptive, the system destroying people's lives, keeping people in poverty, and all these other things. And it reminds me always of this phrase from Lampedusa's The Leopard, which is, if you want things to continue how they are, they're going to have to change. And I think this new strand of like ethical woke capitalism, it's what the bourgeoisie realizes it has to do in order to help people realize, in order to help people think that things are changing, while in reality, nothing's really changing. Wealth continues to be ciphered to a very small amount of very wealthy people that maybe now they're diversified a little bit more, but the mass of people continue to live in poverty, continue to be overworked, continue to feel alienated in their everyday life, to feel meaninglessness when they go to work, to just basically consume pointless entertainment when they get home from work. Everything continues to be essentially the same, except that the entertainment changes because it's a little bit more diverse. The enterprise changed, they're a little bit more diverse. The pundits and the ideologues become a little bit more diverse. And there's no problem in diversity, right? One of the things that the socialist countries have done is sort of enforce diversity, and I think that's okay. But the problem is when that's painted as freedom, and that's painted as emancipation, especially for oppressed and marginalized groups, because it can confuse a hell of a lot of people, right? And I was recently just watching the show that I just finished a show that my wife made me watch. I had to pretend not to like it, but it was an entertaining show. I don't know if you've heard of it, but Partner Track. And it's the epitome of this sort of woke approach that capitalism sees that it really has to take in order to sustain itself. And there's this figure of this environmentalist guy, and he he's so cringe because he's running a multi-billion-dollar company. You know that the only way that that can happen is through this mass exploitation of people, and that all the wealth that they have accumulated has meant that at the other pole you have a bunch of people that are poor as shit. But he's like this eco warrior, and he's like painted as a super ethical figure. And at the end of the day, the protagonist, like their uh, their um, their moments of qualitative transformation when they go from realizing that everything they've done is bad to doing something good, it's also rounded around this person that's like, we want to make an ecological capitalism and save the planet. And all this language is so pompous and it's so ridiculous, but it's necessary now that people are realizing, statements from climate scientists around the world are explicitly saying, look, it's the system that we have that's destroying the planet. And it's pretty clear that the only way that you can deal with something like this without resorting to having the mass of the population in poverty and having degrowth and Malthusianism is through eco-socialism, through having a planned, rational metabolism between society and nature, to plan and to produce in such a way that you're conscious of the limits that are in nature, and how to work dialectically with those so that you don't overpass them, but so that you continue to also grow and have conditions for people to flourish.
Yeah, the other thing that Bill Gates said in his article was he deflected all of the criticism onto climate change and the war in Ukraine. So this is all Putin's fault, and this is the fault of climate change. We need to buy more seeds and more fertilizer and things like that. So as he's pushing this depopulation ideology, any criticism of his philanthropy, he's able to deflect away onto climate change. Everything's climate change's fault. But don't criticize the system because I'm helping climate change. Look how much money I'm dumping into Africa. You said they pretend to fix the system while not. That immediately reminded me of this article from a while back. Bill Gates repeats pledge to give away virtually all of his fortune, though his net worth has doubled since he said it. So this just shows how philanthropy works under capitalism, He literally promised to give away all his wealth and doubled his wealth in doing so. In this New York Times article, after being accused of debt trapping farmers in Africa, he's saying we need to give them more credits. We need to give farmers more credits. And he calls them credits like he's talking about fucking tokens out of Dave & Buster's or something. But he's talking about a loan. He's talking about credit as in a loan from a Western bank, that they're going to have to pay back with interest. So he's not giving away money. He's using his philanthropy to make billions of dollars as he buys up all the farmland, both in the global south and here in the U.S., including the Midwest, which is very scary and is a good way to turn conservative working class people in the Midwest against the ruling class oligarchs and people like Bill Gates right now, by the way. I have an idea to make a little pamphlet explaining like what Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum is trying to do in terms of agriculture going forward. Because I think there could be a lot of people unified against it. Because they claim they're fighting climate change, as Carlos was saying. Right? They claim this is all to fight climate change. They need to just cut down on the population and agricultural supply. And really what it is they want to just keep hoarding wealth. They don't want to give up any of their absurd luxury that they live in. So they see the only option is depopulating the disgusting masses who actually create all their wealth.
Right. And that's the essence of the system. It's accumulation of capital. And it gets to a point as the long-term trend of the falling rate of profit continues to fall. The switch that capitalists make in terms of their capital investment goes towards finance capital and these activities like predatory loans that are given out to the third world in order to indebt them. But it's the essence of the system. The essence of the system is to accumulate capital in the hands of the capitalists. And if that is embedded within an ethical veneer, all it does is make it easier to realize that the fact is still that profits come first. And when profits come first, the climate, people, nothing else matters. It's profit or nothing. That's the sole consideration. And the only time that human beings or the climate is going to come into the conversation is in the sinister fashion, in order to see how that can be used in order to continue having a profit first system and way of operating things like enterprises and states. So it reminds me of this joke that Zizek has oversaid by now. He's said it a million times, but between the old traditional father and the postmodern father, right? The old traditional father tells his son, "You have to go to your grandma's house. I don't care what you say," right? You know that that's a direct form of repression. You can read it easily, and then you can also fight it, right? Or at least be conscious of the fact that you're being screwed. But the postmodern father is more manipulative. He's more sinister. He says to the kid, "You know how much your grandma loves it when you visit her," and he makes the kid feel bad to the point where the kid themselves is the one that wants to go to the grandma's house. And that's what we end up having when we have this ethical form of capitalism. It puts a veil in these exploitative, between you and these exploitative practices, that makes it easier to see that at the end of the day, it's profit first and fuck everything else. You're muted.
Sorry, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We're about almost 30 minutes in, so we have to go on Ramiro's show later. So should we hit our main topic of tonight and talk about MAGA communism? The reason we probably have 100 people in here right now. I can't. We do like our cadre school where we read all this theory and get ready to teach people theory and stuff, and it gets viewers. There are people here learning theory with us, but then you talk about some internet beef or something like MAGA communism, and boom, your viewers are like doubled. But it is what it is.
Right. We've talked about that before, that we'll do
Shame
like
on you all.
dumb videos on Ben Shapiro or something, and they get 4 times as many views as stuff that's more important. But that's what the internet is, right? These are spaces that are controlled by the owning class, and that obviously they're going to create parameters and pathways that don't lead people to what they need, but that lead people to what's entertaining, and that lead people towards sort of controlled oppositional spaces. And that's, it leads people to Vosh. It leads people to certain compatible forms of quote unquote socialism. And we've talked about this quite a bit before, but I think the MAGA communism topic, as it emerges, I've seen some videos of the people that have brought it forth describe it, and I can't help but see it as a reaction to a phenomenon that I think should be rightfully criticized, which is this phenomenon of wokeism, and how capitalist imperialism is using wokeism to both legitimize imperialism, but to cancel whole swaths of the working class and say, look, they're not pure enough. They don't check off all of our a priori purity markers, and therefore they are unorganizable. They're all a basket of deplorables. As Hillary Clinton said, they're racist, they're fascist, you can't organize them. And that's fundamentally anti-communist. That is anti-communist. Communists are the people that, when the ruling class foists divisions on the working class and on the working masses in general, they're the ones that go to the working masses and, through the process of class struggle, help them overcome the divisions that have been foisted on them by the ruling class. The task of communists is to unite the working class and to struggle based on class. So I think that the initial reaction, right, the initial negation to that form of purity fetish, which says, look, this big chunk of the working class is not pure enough to be organized. That's correct. That's something that has to be criticized. Now, the affirmative side of the negation is the part that I have trouble agreeing with, or quite honestly disagree with, because the fact of the matter is that after 2016, the liberals tried to spin this narrative that it was the racist white working class that got Trump elected. And that became this big thing. And there was a bunch of news pieces done about how evil the white working class was to get Trump elected, and how racist they were, and all these other things. But then every study that has been done has found that only 25% of the people that voted Trump were from the working class, right? Which is a percentage that's equal to the percentage of workers that had voted Republicans in the previous elections. So to take up a slogan like MAGA Communism, which represents a very small but significant portion of the working class, is to feed into the divisions that the ruling class foists on working people in the same way that liberals do. Liberals say, look, these people are not pure enough to be organized, and therefore they cross out a whole swath of the working class. The other side, the MAGA communism side, says that the only ones that are pure enough to be organized are the workers that are for MAGA, the workers that are not woke or something like that. And that's why we're going to use the slogan. And if you want to appeal to the working class, you have to talk about the working class. You have to talk about the concrete demands of the working class, the conditions, the horrible conditions that this decrepit form of capitalist imperialism has the working masses in. And you can win them over, but you don't do that through slogans that appeal to what, 15, 20% of the working class. You have to appeal to all of the working class. So I think that's just pretty basic. I think the initial reaction is good. We should reject those attempts from the more rad lib sections of the communist movement to not organize the Trump workers. We have to be honest with ourselves. Look, the Trump phenomenon has been analyzed very incorrectly, I think, by communists. They've seen it as just a turn towards fascism and the signal of how racism is still alive in the white working class, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how I read it. I see it as a symptom of the moment that we're in capitalism, that these large swaths of working people can vote for a billionaire. That is very clearly, even if he has the rhetoric, the populist rhetoric of draining the swamp, of being against the wars, he had 4 years and he didn't do anything substantially different. He had the most hawkish people in his cabinet. So there was nothing. It's the bourgeoisie. It's bourgeois politics. It's a bourgeois movement. It's a bourgeois party and a bourgeois faction of a bourgeois party. And it's not something that we, I think, should be allying with. But we should still nonetheless see that the workers that voted for Trump, in part, especially the ones that did it as a fuck you to the elite and to the established order, that shows that they're ready for a socialist message. And the fact of the matter is that the conditions that led them to be open enough to Trump can only truly be overcome. They can only really satisfy what it is they want with the socialist movement, not with Trump, not with MTG, not with the Republican or the Democratic Party. No bourgeois party is going to actually satisfy the needs of the working people. It's us, and we have to take advantage of the situation. It's done by organizing the whole working class, not just the MAGA one or taking up slogans from 20% of the working class to try to organize all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but for every like rural or working class person, at least in the Midwest, who likes Trump, there's another one who hates him. I don't mean just like dislikes him, like despises him. There's a lot of that going on as well. And then there's just a lot of people who need to move on. The biggest Trump or want to move on. The biggest Trump supporter I know told me we need something new in 2024, Eddie. There's a lot of people. The working class isn't so simple that they're just following around Trump like, MAGA. Not that. That's what the MAGA communists are saying exactly. But my main criticism of it, I think I've voiced my criticisms pretty fully on TikTok. A lot of my main ones. One of the criticisms was saying, make America great again. Versus, I was just reading in Utopian and Scientific, Engels says tradition is the great preventative force, from history moving forward and breaking all traditions and breaking relations of production. That doesn't mean that you can't appeal to some traditions, and that traditions aren't important in society. But, we don't want to go back to a previous time in America. We don't want to make it, great again like it was at some period of time. Because America's always been a dictatorship of the owning class. Some people were arguing with us that America was socialist at one point, but no, just because there were radical Republicans around the time of America's founding or during the Civil War or whenever else who were advocating for socialism, That doesn't mean that they were the ones who won power. America has always been a dictatorship of the owning class. Not, in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War were still class struggles that moved the mode of production forward, or were progressive wars in history. But, that doesn't mean that's what we're trying to return to. We're trying to move forward to something new and better. As Stalin said, for the first time, a state where the majority wields it for the suppression of the owning minority. And what another one of my main criticisms of the MAGA communism thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is that, like, we all admit that liberal NGOs are pushing wokeism, or are using, LGBTQ issues, social issues, issues of racial justice to enforce capitalism and imperialism and co-opting this stuff. We all admit this at this point. But I don't think MAGA is the antithesis to that, right? I just think MAGA is the other side of that, right? MAGA is come vote for the Republican Party because we're not woke. Right, come vote for Ron DeSantis. Forget the fact that he's being funded by corporations and whatnot. He's anti-woke, and that's all you need. When in reality, we should be pointing these people who are nervous about these liberal, imperialist, woke NGOs, and saying, look, they all stem from capitalism. These things all stem from the relations of production and the capitalist class trying to maintain their power, rather than just embracing MAGA and saying, yeah, MAGA, turn against wokeism in the abstract. And a good video about that, I think, is Hans Georg Muller's The Mirror of Wokeism, and he talks about Jordan Peterson as one of these figures. One of these figures who says, look at all these postmodern neo-Marxists, all the wokeism and stuff you see stemming from the capitalist class today, that's actually Marxism. And, obviously that's not what the MAGA communists are doing, but I do think ultimately MAGA ends up being a mirror of wokeism, just anti-wokeism in the abstract, rather than being focused on being anti-capital.
Right. And it's very interesting, because if it's about taking up slogans that the working class already accepts, take up Build Back Better. Most of the working class, especially its more conscious elements, organized in trade unions. And remember, Lenin said unions are schools of communism, schools for communism. It might be a little different after McCarthyism, but still, it's a sort of embryo for what socialist organizing could be. But the Build Back Better program is supported by basically every union in the country and most working people. We're not taking up the Build Back Better program as a slogan. We're not saying Build Back Better communism, right? We have to come up with our own working class slogans. And look, one of the very clear things about our project, one of the essential reasons why we even started in the first place, is because we disagreed with the tendency on the left that saw the struggle for socialism as abolish America, right? That saw America as reducible to the history of settler colonialism, imperialism, slavery, exploitation, oppression, police violence, etc., etc., etc. And we understood that, look, you have to look at things more dialectically. America as a whole contains two poles. It contains its pole that is dominated by that ugly history, and that's the pole of the ruling class and its state. And then it contains this other pole from the very beginning, even before, with people like Roger Williams, who had been fighting against American exceptionalism before there was even a United States of America, before there was a Declaration of Independence. You have had from the start people fighting against the evils of what the ruling class and its state and its apparatuses have done. And as folks who want to struggle for socialism, we realize that what a vanguard is an advanced detachment of the working class. But that's a really bad word, right? That it shouldn't have been that word, because we don't want to be detached. We want to be, as is explained nicely by people like Lenin and Stalin, we want to be ahead, but not too far ahead where we break off from the working class and create a gap. And we also don't want to be too far behind. We don't want to be right where the working class is at ideologically, because then we're not a vanguard. We're not leading anything. We're just a rear guard. So we have to be advanced enough so that we don't lose touch with the working class, and not too far ahead either. And I think the thing that we've been talking about over the last few streams, the sort of Gramscian formula of take the kernels, the essence in the common sense understanding and feeling of the masses that can be reoriented towards socialism, take that and do that. We have to do that. And that's done after a concrete, honest historical analysis of America's history. And it's done by getting the positive aspects of our history and get tore down. It got Bernie stickers, so I don't know if that's a symbol of social democracy falling, but take the positive aspects of the history and reorient them to socialism, even the ambiguous ones, right? In the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal with a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. There's also principles of sovereignty. There's principles of a government of, by, and for the people. We know that under conditions of bourgeois capitalism of capitalist imperialism, none of that could exist. You can't have a government of, by, and for the people if the government is controlled by capitalists, if it functions as a committee for the affairs of the capitalist class. You can't have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness when most people are working countless hours a day and exploited and don't have health insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We know the discourse, we've gone over it. So yes, of course, we should be taking positive aspects of American history and reorienting them towards socialism. That doesn't mean taking this recent, movement that stems from a bourgeois politician, taking its symbol and its slogan, MAGA, and using it towards social. It's not the same thing. There's a lot we can pick from our history to use. MAGA, in my opinion, is not one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, like this is interesting. Thank you, Chris Morlock, for the super chat. But we have to be able to engage in a minimalist electoral strategy. An electoral strategy for who, though? Like Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene, because MAGA stems from a bourgeois politician. Like who's going to run for office off MAGA communism? And then, even when Trump got in office, he wasn't able to do anything. He was blocked by, he did try and pull troops out of a bunch of different places at the end of his presidency, and he was easily blocked by the Pentagon officials. And what it's like, this comment also mentions the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks didn't base their entire strategy on a slogan, right? I don't think it's about just finding the magic slogan. What's the right slogan or what's the right political movement that we can sublate? It's not about a slogan or a political movement. It's about organizing workers directly, organizing workers any place where you can find worker combinations. That's a scientific way to look at it. And I've been starting a CPUSA chapter in the process of that where I'm at, and reading the CPUSA's 1935 manual from when they had 1 million members. And it's just very clear that there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the ground. We need to be deeply connected to the unions, which, the communists in my area are not yet. Need to be deeply connected to the community. And, the Communist Party needs to be powerful enough to organize politically and send people to help out with strikes and do mutual aid things to actually be there for people and actually be a force, actually be a force in the community and actually act as a political force. But to do that, you need organized workers as a part of the party. You need educated and theoretically advanced workers as a part of the party. And that's not going to come about through finding the right slogan or even sublating a political slogan like MAGA, right? That comes about from organizing workers and meeting them where they're at, whether they're a Biden supporter or a Trump voter or whatever else.
Right. And
thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. And the slogans of the Bolsheviks, the two main ones, especially right before the revolution, peace, land, and bread, and all power to the Soviets. None of those are bourgeois slogans that are then tried to be reappropriated towards socialism, as the MAGA slogan is. The MAGA slogan, it's a slogan that has popped up from one section of the bourgeoisie and its political battles with another section. We have to understand that Trump represents industrial capital, and that the U.S., as I've mentioned before, because of the falling rate of profit and the increasing financialization of the economy, the U.S., most of the capitalist class represents finance capital and other forms of capital. we have to understand that the bourgeoisie itself has contradictions with each other. And right now, there's, I believe, two central poles of the bourgeoisie, the sort of MAGA pole and the non-MAGA pole. And we see that by the fact that, neoconservative war hawks like George Bush are getting closer and closer to the Democratic Party. So these two poles, it's not a matter of sublating them. These are just two poles that we can use in our analysis and maybe play the one against the other off and stuff like that in order to promote fights and splits within the working class, make it harder and harder for them to rule each day, and ultimately advance the struggle for socialism. But we don't take up the slogans and the symbols of one of the poles and try to fight for socialism on that basis. I don't think that's correct. And look, I've seen some of the stuff from the MAGA communist people. I think it's very easy to accept the MAGA communist statements because it's embedded in these other sentiments that I do think are correct. You do have to reach working people indiscriminately of where they stand on social positions. And then, the liberals hear that and they say, oh no, they say you have to organize KKK people. No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what most socially conservative workers believe. You have to organize people indiscriminately. You have to organize people because they're part of the working class. And whatever backwardness they might have, that is overcome in the process of struggle. But you don't go from there to accepting these different slogans that have been accepted by a small portion of the working class. And it's very easy to buy into this MAGA communism because it's always embedded in truth. It's embedded in the truth that a big section of the left has ignored the workers that voted for Trump, has relegated them, as Hillary did, as a basket of deplorables, and has focused, on more cultural issues. That it's not that we shouldn't ignore. We should fight, these battles, but the center should really be class struggle, right? Political economic concerns that relate to the conditions of the working class. And I think that's perfectly fine. And maybe because that's somewhat not hegemonized in American socialism, that's what attracts a lot of people to it. But the MAGA communism slogan, man, that's just not it. There's so many other things that you can come up with. The Communist Party back in the day had black and white unite and fight. Like there's so many slogans that we have came up with organically from the struggle for socialism in the US that we can use instead of just grabbing onto the latest trend in the struggles between different antipoles of the bourgeois class.
For sure. I don't know if you responded to these super chats yet, but we got one from Brandon. Thank you for the $10 super chat. Says someone was eventually going to try to infiltrate those right maggot types. Aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They're going to have to be managed in some way. In my opinion, it was never going to be 100% pretty. No, definitely not. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying there. I think we agree with everything you said here. We just don't think the solution is MAGA communism. We have our own thing. We have communism. We're Marxist-Leninists. We're not Trump supporters. We don't want to take America back to some previous time. We want to sublate the current form or the current American economic system. We want to build American socialism by and for the American working class, which includes people who voted for Trump. Because we don't organize people based on their political leanings. We organize them based on class, and that principle is part of the reason that Carlos and I aren't jumping on board with MAGA communism, because we recognize that a lot of the working class freaking hates MAGA, and we don't want to alienate them either. So I'm trying to get to all the super chats here. Jay Rosales, if you feel that the slogan is insufficient, not effective, then what is the issue? Seems like y'all are willing to engage with MAGA voters. We are, yeah. It's embracing the slogan and equating the slogan with communism. Which, I mean, I said that just now a little bit earlier, and you left this super chat a while back, but that's basically it. I think it's going to polarize the working class. It's a political movement or a political leaning, and I think out of the movement and to the masses is a good slogan. Like, we got to get to the workplaces, we got to get to the shop floors, we got to get to the union workers, the union rank and file, the former soldiers or the current soldiers who got tricked into joining the military, the immigrant agricultural workers getting paid pennies. These are the kind of people we got to reach. I don't know where I was going with that, but all those people are in those positions based on class, based on their relationship to the means of production. It's not because of their political leaning why we organize them. We'll organize people who pretty much voted for anybody in this messed up political circus that we have in the U.S.
And if you want to take part of what's radical in MAGA, or part of what's ambiguous enough in MAGA to make radical, and use that in your discursive approach to MAGA workers, that's absolutely fine. That's part of taking, the rational kernel of common sense and re-articulating it towards socialism, right? So Trump talked about pulling us away from the wars, right? He didn't actually do that, and he, it involved us into more war. He stepped away from the Iran deal, and he was fierce against China. And most presidents are usually they back up from one thing, like Obama. He backed out from Cuba, and then they're hawks and other things. So, but you can take that slogan that most of the MAGA workers agree with, no more war, and reorient it towards socialism by explaining to them why it is that the capitalist imperialist system needs constant war, right? You can take the drain the swamp sentiment. What does that mean? It means, all of our politicians are corrupt. They're bought by these major corporations. Yeah, no duh. We've known this for 150 years. The state is but the committee of the affairs of the bourgeoisie. It's an instrument of the ruling class in order to suppress the classes that it oppresses and that it exploits. We know this. So we take the rational kernels that are ambiguous enough to be reoriented towards socialism, and we use that to pull people out of MAGA into communism, not to merge MAGA and communism. That's just, basic.
I think that answers probably, or would be our response to this. Bolsheviks most definitely sublated right-wing movement and used them to their advantage, drove wedges between industrial and rentier and finance capital all the time. Mao made an art form. Yeah, we're definitely down for doing that, as Carlos said, reorienting these people's ideas towards socialism, but not merging the ideas, because ultimately we want a class-based movement, a movement that hits on class issues like peace, land, and bread. Those are all issues of class, issues that affect people universally. And when you move away from that, when you start moving to the political, especially in the modern era, where American politics is so polarized over social issues, which rarely ever change, rather than issues of class, I think bringing MAGA into our movement, bringing MAGA into communism, leading the conversation with MAGA, is already leading the conversation, with these polarizing political social issues. Whereas we just want to say peace, land, and bread. We're going to, make your life better. We're going to nationalize the health insurance companies and give you health care. If I'm wrong, if we're wrong, if MAGA communism is, that slogan itself is the way to sublate people, and, just tons of working class Trump supporters start watching Haas and become communists, like, I'm not going to be against it. I've said a million times, I support, for the most part, what Haas and Infrared do with teaching people theory and criticizing wokeism. But we don't agree with the slogan, so we're voicing that disagreement. But that doesn't mean we're going to root against, y'all in your organizing efforts, or root against what Infrared is doing. If it works, then we'll shrug our shoulders and say, good, and adapt our theory based on that. But I don't think it's a winning strategy, is why I felt compelled to voice something about it. And some people accuse us, of like just hating the MAGA communists, just wanting to join in with the liberal rad lib mob to pile on them and That is not us. That ain't us. And I know Haas told infrared fans, not to pile on us, and I appreciate that, because yeah, it's a principled critique that we're trying to make, because we don't think it's the right path forward. It's not, an attack against individuals.
Right. That's a weird accusation. Midwest going with the rad libs just because it's popular, right? Because when it was really popular to say abolish America and to say how if you are a patriot, you're a fascist, we were so on board with that. No, we're on board with what, after a concrete investigation of our current conditions, we consider to be right. We consider that it's right to have love for the positive history of your country, and that in order to have a successful socialist struggle, it should be grounded on a love for the people. That's just basic, right? It's just basic. If some people want to say that patriotism is identical to loving the state, the flag, and all these other things, then I guess we're not patriots. But what we love is the American people and its beautiful and very rich history of struggle, which has been ignored and whitewashed by the bourgeoisie. And we realize that this struggle of our working class at home is necessarily interrelated to the struggle of the working class abroad. That it is by definition internationalist, especially because of the condition that the U.S. is in as the leading empire, the leading imperialist force. And so we've said, even when it wasn't popular, right, when we lost a ton of followers over it, we said we're okay with a love for the country and using these old traditions that are positive and not reducing the U.S. to just the bad stuff, and that, we want to abolish the empire. We want to get rid of the bourgeois state and have a worker state. But to do that, you need to base yourself on part of the positive side of American history. And we called that patriotism. Maybe people agree with us, but want to call it something else. They don't call it that, whatever. The Ukraine thing came around. We got our TikTok accounts banned. We lost like 10,000 followers on Instagram. We lost a bunch of followers in a bunch of different places. We got people hitting up our schools trying to fire us. And
multiple times.
We stuck to our fucking positions. You know why? Because we're principled. And if we think at some point that we're wrong, we'll change our mind, because we don't have the ego that helps us stick to positions just because we want to be right. We want to engage with truth. And if we're wrong, it's stupid for us to stick with something that's wrong. And that's why we'll speak out against when we see things that we believe are wrong, even if it costs us followers or likes or subscribers, whatever the fuck it costs us.
Or our jobs.
Or our jobs, right? Or our jobs. People forget that we do this on our spare time. We're risking job opportunities. We're risking our current jobs because of what we do, but we're still doing it because it's our duty. It's our duty as communists to do this, just like it's our duty to speak out when part of the left cancels a big chunk of the working class, and just like it's our duty to speak out when part of the left wants to hold a slogan and unite it with the communist movement that is tied to only maybe 20% of the working class. So you can say anything you want about our positions. What you can't say is that we pass judgment based on what the mob is feeding. That's what you can't say, because repeatedly we have stood in positions that have not been the most popular among the left. We have taken hits, but at the end of the day, we have done what we think is right. And wherever we believe we have been wrong, or that practice has shown that we have been wrong, we have corrected ourselves.
Yeah, and that's how you have to be as a Marxist, and it's hard, especially when you're engaging in internet debates. But, I think that's good to keep in mind when you're entering into polemics or entering into a debate like that. Like Danny Haifong was saying on his stream the other day that we got into a polemic with him. It was mostly him and Kayla. But I think the name of Kayla's response to Danny was a comradely critique. And I'm not saying you need to be like that friendly and give everyone a hug every time you have a Marxist debate, but, go into it with the fact, understanding that we could debate theory, that this stuff is complex, and there's a lot of gray area and a lot of stuff to be debated, without it leading to a split, and in fact, we need that debate. That debate is our lifeblood, as Gabriel Rockhill says. And just recently for my Venezuela book, I wanted to do a chapter about the way that patriotism has been used to organize for the Bolivarian Revolution. and what we can learn from that as socialists in the U.S. And in order to find the best possible argument I could for patriotism and against patriotism, I went to the polemic between Danny and Kayla, and I reread both of the articles that they had made. So in that debate, I was able to go back to it and learn a lot and educate myself, which is going to help me then, write a book, which will hopefully educate more people. So, debate is important, and debate shouldn't always lead to a split. So, and good on Haas, honestly, for telling people not to pile on us. Like, it wasn't even that many people. I was just roasting the people who were doing it because I'm like, this is what you guys make fun of rad libs for doing. But yeah, it's all love. Organize the working class, and if we're using a different strategy, it is what it is.
And you're bound to have different approaches because it's such a massive country, and it's got so many regions that have such different culture. I mean, I just saw this guy from the Midwest. He's in New York. I think he's an artist, a musician, and he's like waving at people, and no one waves back. But in the Midwest, when you do the two fingers, everyone waves back, right? There's so many different cultural uniquenesses in different regions of the country that all has to be calculated in the concrete approach one takes to organizing. And so I've heard people that have gone on, Ramiro's show that we're about to go on in less than 14 minutes. I've heard people say, look, the communities that I come from, if you show up with the American flag, you're getting beat up, right? We're going to ask you to get the fuck out of here. That's fine. That's fine. You have to take a different approach to that community, right? In the communities that we have been in for the last, you for your whole life, but me for the last 6 years, when you go into a center, a working class center, when you go into union halls, you see the American flag, right? So if you're like burning flags in front of these people, it's a different situation than it is in other parts of the country. And we have to be cognizant of that. And that's part of the process of, not being lazy, not having a one size fits all copy paste approach to organizing, but understanding that each place needs its own concrete investigation in order to figure out what are the best ways to advance the struggle for socialism there and to unite it to the rest of the country, right? So it's, maybe both sides are probably, right. Maybe the people like Danny, I haven't seen too much of his stuff. The stuff that I've seen has been largely positive, but maybe the non-patriotism approach, maybe it works for him in his communities, right? If we show up to working class places burning flags and talking about abolish America, it's not going to work for us, right? So in all fairness, maybe after their concrete investigations, that's what works for them. It's not what works for us. And that has to be understood. And I think that from what I saw yesterday in Danny's stream, that's generally accepted, right? The different approaches, if they work fine, there's always space for collaboration because we're dealing with different communities. I don't want to say that it goes to the extent of being a different country. There are, of course, similarities, but we're dealing with objectively different communities that require different strategies. That then the difficulty is how do you unite that all into a federal struggle for socialism as a country as a whole?
Yeah, and that's why everyone needs to pick up the CPUSA manual from 1935 and start organizing your community, right? Because this is kind of going back to what we were getting at earlier. Like, there's no magic slogan, that's sort of the same thing with there's no one size fits all. We're not just going to find the right, set of principles or, the right ideology or the right rhetoric, I guess is the word I'm looking for, to repeat over and over again. And all of a sudden, boom, the workers are organized. It's getting into the communities, getting into the different workplaces, understanding the important industries in your town, figuring out how to build connections there with the rank and file, get more places unionized, really building up worker combinations, really building up the working class in a scientific way. And then you'll find out, through practice, what the best strategies and ways to organize your community are, which, as we said, are going to be different all across the country. If it's MAGA communism, it's MAGA communism. Go for it. More power to you.
Oh yeah. I want to link the folks in the chat to Ramiro's
I sent it once, but send it again. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to be going on there, and we're going to be talking about propaganda. Let me see how I can click on it. I am an old man when it comes to technology, but it should be a fun conversation. We're going to be doing it in approximately 10 minutes. So I'm hoping to get my dose of vitamin C before we go on. That's my
Yeah, I gotta go get some too.
I got you addicted to vitamin C, didn't I?
You did, yes. It's like anytime I need to read or write, I gotta pop vitamin C. Ooh, we got a super chat
It's
here
like a
before we head out.
healthy form of cocaine. Thank you, David.
Right. U.S. comrades need to work out the way forward. It's in line with the material conditions of the U.S. In Australia, our struggle will have its own unique character. Couldn't agree more, David. Beautifully put. And
Sure,
thank you so much for the $10. All right, y'all. We'll see you on Ramiro's show if you want to keep listening to us yammer about politics. What are we talking about again? Sorry.
We're going to be talking about propaganda and Edward Bernays. Ramiro's very knowledgeable on Edward Bernays. I haven't studied him much, but I'm definitely interested in learning and in discussing propaganda. It's developed a lot, especially since the technological revolution. So it requires constant, concrete study in order to readjust our tactics and our strategies.
For sure. We'll see y'all there.
See you, folks.